Federal District Courtroom Number 4 came alive with a low, controlled hum as the morning session prepared to begin. Sunlight filtered through the tall, reinforced windows, casting narrow beams across polished wooden benches. The room carried the familiar weight of federal proceedings, orderly, quiet, but charged with invisible pressure. At the defense table sat Adrian Cross. He was already seated when most people entered, posture straight, hands calmly folded over a closed legal pad. He wore a dark, navy-tailored suit, crisp white shirt, and a muted tie, professional but understated. There was no sign of anxiety in his face, no restless tapping, no whispered strategy sessions with an attorney, because he didn't have one. That alone drew occasional glances from observers filling the gallery. Federal court defendants rarely sat alone, especially not this composed. Adrian's eyes moved slowly across the courtroom, not in fear, but in quiet assessment. He seemed less like a man awaiting judgment, and more like someone studying the room itself. The side door opened. Officer Ryan Cole stepped in. His uniform was pressed sharply, badge polished, utility belt arranged with deliberate precision. He walked, with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed the day would be routine. Another testimony, another confirmed arrest, another file closed. He spotted Adrian immediately. Cole's lips curled slightly, a faint smirk forming as he took his seat near the prosecution table. To him, Adrian was just another uncooperative civilian who had made the mistake of challenging police authority during a roadside stop. Nothing more. At the bench, Court Clerk Marlene Ortiz organized case files with mechanical efficiency. She adjusted her glasses, scanning documents, occasionally glancing toward the unusually full gallery. Nearly every seat was occupied. Some observers looked like law students. Others wore dark suits, too formal, too expressionless to be casual attendees. Two men in particular sat in the second row, speaking quietly while reviewing a folder neither allowed out of their hands. Cole noticed them briefly, then dismissed the thought. The bailiff's voice cut cleanly through the room. All rise. The side chamber door opened as Judge Evelyn Harper entered, robes flowing behind her in measured steps. The entire courtroom stood instantly. Judge Harper was known for precision-controlled tone, sharp legal memory, zero tolerance for theatrics. She took her seat, scanning the room once before nodding. Be seated. Chairs moved in quiet unison. Her eyes settled first on the prosecution table, then shifted to the defense. She paused for half a second longer than usual when she saw Adrian sitting alone. "Defendant present without counsel?" she asked. Adrian stood respectfully. "Yes, Your Honor. I'll be representing myself for procedural purposes today." His voice was calm, even, educated. No hesitation. Judge Harper studied him briefly, then nodded once. "Very well, Mr. Cross." Officer Cole leaned back in his chair, amused. Representing himself? That told Cole everything he thought he needed to know. Confident civilians often folded the fastest once testimony began. The clerk called the case forward. Papers shifted. Recording systems activated with a soft electronic click. Adrian resumed his seat, hands returning calmly to the table. Cole adjusted his microphone, preparing to testify. Across the room, the two suited observers stopped whispering and focused forward. The air inside courtroom number 4 tightened, subtle, almost imperceptible. What appeared to be a routine obstruction case was about to begin, but the stillness surrounding Adrian Cross suggested something else entirely. Something waiting. Something the officer had not yet realized he had walked into. The courtroom settled into procedural silence as Court Clerk Marlene Ortiz finished logging the case details into the federal recording system. A small red indicator light blinked on every word from this moment forward would be permanently documented. Judge Evelyn Harper glanced toward the prosecution table. "Call your first witness." Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Whitaker stood, buttoning his suit jacket before stepping forward. The United States calls Officer Ryan Cole to the stand. Cole rose immediately, posture straight, expression composed with professional confidence. He walked to the witness stand with the ease of someone who had testified many times before. His boots echoed softly against the hardwood floor, steady, deliberate. He took the oath, hand raised. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." Cole sat, adjusting the microphone slightly closer. Whitaker approached. "Officer Cole, state your full name and department for the record." "Ryan Matthew Cole, Patrol Division, Westbridge Police Department." "Directing your attention to the evening of March 14th, Whitaker continued. "Were you on active patrol duty?" "Yes, sir." "Describe the events that led to the defendant's arrest." Cole nodded once, prepared. "At approximately 9:42 p.m., I observed a black SUV traveling 15 miles over the posted speed limit on Route 17. I initiated a traffic stop. The driver, identified as Adrian Cross, was non-compliant from the outset." Adrian sat still at the defense table, hands folded, eyes forward. Whitaker paced slowly. "In what way was he non-compliant?" "He refused multiple verbal commands," Cole said. "He questioned my authority, declined to exit the vehicle when instructed, and obstructed my investigation." "Did you perceive a threat?" Cole leaned slightly toward the microphone. "Yes. His behavior was evasive. His refusal to comply escalated the situation." Whitaker nodded. "What action did you take?" "I removed him from the vehicle and placed him under arrest for obstruction, failure to comply, and suspected interference with an active investigation." A faint murmur moved through the gallery before the bailiff's glance restored silence. Whitaker approached the evidence monitor. "Your Honor, the prosecution submits bodycam excerpts and arrest documentation." "Admitted provisionally," Judge Harper said. The screen flickered on. Grainy night footage filled the monitor, flashing patrol lights, roadside shadows, Cole's voice issuing commands. "Step out of the vehicle now." Adrian's recorded voice came through calm, measured. "Officer, I'm complying. I just need clarification on your—" The footage cut abruptly to physical restraint. Cole folded his hands confidently as the clip ended. Whitaker turned back. "Officer, did the defendant ever identify himself as a federal official?" "No, sir." "Did he present credentials?" "No." Whitaker nodded, satisfied. No further questions. Judge Harper turned toward the defense table. "Mr. Cross, you may cross-examine." Adrian stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. The room quieted not out of respect, but curiosity. A self-represented defendant cross-examining an arresting officer was rarely effective, often disastrous. Adrian approached the podium without papers. "No legal pad. No notes." He looked up at Officer Cole, not with hostility, but calm focus. "Good morning, officer." Cole gave a faint dismissive nod. "Morning." Adrian's voice remained level. "You testified that I refused commands. Can you specify which lawful command I verbally refused?" Cole blinked once, slightly caught off guard by the precision. "You delayed compliance." "That wasn't my question," Adrian replied evenly. "Which command did I refuse?" A brief pause formed. Cole shifted in his seat. Across the gallery, the two suited observers watched closely. Adrian continued, tone respectful but surgical. "Let's be exact, officer. This is federal court." The balance of the room shifted subtly. For the first time since taking the stand, Ryan Cole no longer looked entirely comfortable. The shift in the courtroom was subtle but undeniable. Officer Ryan Cole adjusted his posture in the witness chair, shoulders tightening slightly as Adrian Cross stood at the defense podium. What had begun as routine testimony was now slowing, narrowing, becoming precise. Adrian spoke calmly. "You stated under oath that I refused lawful commands. I'll ask again, what exact command did I refuse?" Cole cleared his throat. "You hesitated when ordered to exit the vehicle." Hesitation isn't refusal, Adrian replied evenly. Did I say no? Cole paused. No. Did I attempt to flee? No. Did I make threats? No. Adrian nodded once, letting the answers settle into the official record. The courtroom was silent enough to hear paper shift at the clerk's desk. Adrian took a small step forward. Let's discuss escalation. At what point did you determine physical removal was necessary? Cole straightened. When I deemed the situation non-compliant and potentially dangerous. Based on what observable threat? Cole blinked. Behavioral indicators. Specify. Another pause. You were argumentative. Adrian's expression didn't change. Argumentative, or asking questions? Cole didn't answer immediately. Judge Harper leaned slightly forward. Officer, answer the question. Asking questions? Cole admitted. Adrian nodded again. Thank you. Now, before physical contact was initiated, did I inform you I was reaching for identification? Cole hesitated. You made a movement. Yes, Adrian said, a movement toward my inside jacket pocket, after verbally stating my intent. Correct? Cole's jaw tightened. Yes. A faint murmur rippled through the gallery, before being silenced. Adrian pressed forward, not aggressively, but relentlessly controlled. And instead of allowing me to retrieve identification, you restrained me? Yes. For officer safety, despite no weapon visible. Yes. Despite full verbal compliance. Cole shifted in his seat. You were delaying. Adrian let the statement hang, then pivoted. Let's review body cam timestamped 21 hours, 44 minutes and 12 seconds. The prosecution table stirred slightly, Whitaker flipping quickly through notes. Adrian continued. At that timestamp you stated, and I quote, I don't care who you think you are. You're getting out of this car. Do you deny saying that? Cole exhaled slowly. No. Adrian tilted his head slightly. So, before confirming identity, before reviewing documentation, you had already decided escalation was necessary. Whitaker rose. Objection argumentative. Judge Harper considered briefly. Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Cross. Adrian nodded respectfully. Officer, had you verified my identity before initiating physical force? No. Had you reviewed my credentials? No. Had you requested federal database confirmation? Cole frowned slightly. No, that's not standard during a traffic stop. Adrian's tone remained calm. Understood. Now, did you search my vehicle following arrest? Yes. And you documented finding federal case files, encrypted devices, and task force documentation? Cole hesitated again. Yes. And at that moment, did you contact federal authorities to verify jurisdiction? A longer pause. No. The word landed heavier than the others. Adrian stepped back slightly, giving the courtroom space to absorb the exchange. So, to summarize your testimony, he said quietly, you escalated force before identity verification, restrained a fully compliant individual, and failed to notify federal command after discovering federal investigative materials. Whitaker shifted uncomfortably. Judge Harper's pen stopped moving. Cole's earlier confidence had thinned, replaced now by visible tension in his jawline. Adrian delivered one final question for the sequence. Officer Cole, at any point that evening, did you consider the possibility that the individual you detained might outrank your jurisdictional authority? Silence. Cole didn't answer immediately, because for the first time since taking the stand, the question didn't feel hypothetical anymore. The silence following Adrian Cross's final question lingered heavily in the courtroom. Officer Ryan Cole remained in the witness chair, jaw tight, fingers interlocked so firmly his knuckles had begun to pale. The confidence that carried him onto the stand had thinned into visible strain. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Whitaker rose quickly, attempting to stabilize momentum. Your Honor, The prosecution would like to redirect briefly. Judge Evelyn Harper nodded once. Proceed. Whitaker approached the stand, voice measured but firmer than before. Officer Cole, regardless of identity, officer safety protocols permit you to control a traffic stop scene, correct? Yes, Cole answered, relieved to regain familiar ground. And suspects sometimes falsely claim federal affiliation to avoid arrest? Yes. Whitaker turned slightly toward the bench. So your actions were based on standard patrol procedure, not personal bias? Cole nodded. Correct. Whitaker stepped back. No further questions. Judge Harper's gaze shifted. Mr. Cross. Adrian stood again, composed. Briefly, Your Honor. He approached the evidence monitor rather than the podium this time. If it pleases the court, I'd like to review additional footage, not from Officer Cole's body cam, but from secondary recording devices. Whitaker frowned. Secondary devices? Adrian connected a secure drive to the court system. The clerk looked to the judge, who gave a small nod of approval. The screen flickered. A wider aerial angle appeared far clearer than patrol body cam. Time-stamped, stabilized, multi-angle overlays. The gallery leaned forward, almost in unison. Whitaker's expression shifted. Your Honor, the prosecution hasn't reviewed this footage. Adrian spoke calmly. This footage was logged under Federal Evidence Chain 7A441, shared with the court this morning. Judge Harper turned to the clerk, who confirmed with a quiet nod after checking the docket. Admitted for review. The video played. It showed the roadside stop, but from a distant, elevated vantage point. Cole approached the SUV. Commands were issued. Adrian's hands remained visible on the wheel. Audio enhancement clarified every word. I'm complying, officer. I'm reaching for identification. Cole's voice cut sharply. Don't move. I don't care who you are. The footage zoomed. Digitally federal-grade clarity. No sudden movement. No threat posture. Just controlled compliance. Then physical extraction. The room remained silent as the clip ended. Adrian turned slightly toward the witness stand. Officer Cole, were you aware this stop was being monitored under an active federal observation warrant? Cole blinked. No. Were you aware Route 17 was under joint surveillance due to an ongoing interstate corruption probe? Whitaker's head turned sharply toward Adrian. Cole shook his head slowly. No. Adrian folded his hands behind his back. So when you stated earlier that my federal affiliation was unverified, that was because you never contacted federal command, despite discovering federal investigative materials in my vehicle. Cole swallowed. Yes. Adrian nodded once. Thank you. He returned to the defense table without another word. But the shift in the courtroom was now unmistakable. The gallery observers who had seemed passive before were taking notes. One of the suited men in the second row quietly closed his folder, as if a confirmation had just been reached. Judge Harper removed her glasses briefly, studying the monitor where the federal footage had played. When she spoke, her voice carried a new weight. Officer Cole, remain available for recall. Her gaze moved next to Adrian Cross. Not as a defendant, but with measured judicial curiosity, because the evidence no longer suggested a routine obstruction case. It suggested oversight, documentation, and a possibility the courtroom had not yet fully grasped, that the man seated alone at the defense table had never been on trial at all. The courtroom remained suspended in a dense, almost tangible silence after the federal surveillance footage ended. Judge Evelyn Harper leaned back slightly in her chair, fingers steepled beneath her chin as she reviewed the implications. The shift in tone was unmistakable. What began as a standard obstruction case was now layered with jurisdictional complexity. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Whitaker stood slowly. Your Honor, the prosecution requests clarification regarding the defendant's reference to federal observation warrants. Judge Harper nodded once. Granted. Whitaker turned toward Adrian Cross, measured but cautious now. Mr. Cross, you have introduced federal evidence, referenced surveillance operations, and implied jurisdictional authority. For the sake of procedural clarity, can you state your federal affiliation for the record? The gallery leaned forward. Officer Ryan Cole watched from the witness stand, unease replacing his earlier confidence. Adrian rose calmly from the defense table. Yes, Your Honor. I believe clarification is now appropriate. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, the same motion that had triggered his arrest days earlier. This time, no one stopped him. He placed a slim, black credential wallet on the evidence podium and opened it slowly, turning it toward the bench. Even from a distance, the gold federal seal was unmistakable. Court clerk Marlene Ortiz stood to retrieve it, delivering it carefully to the judge. Judge Harper examined the identification in silence. Her expression didn't change immediately, but her posture did. Straighter, more formal. She read aloud for the record. Adrian Michael Cross, Senior Judicial Oversight Officer, U.S. Department of Justice, Federal Court Compliance Division. A low wave of murmurs swept through the gallery before the bailiff restored order. Whitaker's face had gone still. Cole blinked repeatedly, trying to process the title. Judge Harper continued reviewing the credentials, embedded security markers, holographic authentication, federal clearance coding. All legitimate. All verifiable. She looked up. Mr. Cross, your role involves federal court investigations? Yes, Your Honor. Clarify the scope. Adrian's voice remained composed. My division conducts oversight audits into procedural misconduct, unlawful detention patterns, evidence fabrication, and civil rights violations within state and municipal law enforcement agencies. The words landed with institutional weight. Whitaker exhaled slowly. Judge Harper asked the next question carefully. Were you operating in an official capacity the night of your arrest? Yes, Your Honor. And the materials recovered from your vehicle? Active case documentation related to an ongoing federal task force investigation. Whitaker's voice cut in quietly. Investigation into what? Adrian turned slightly toward him. Multi-department misconduct patterns, including unlawful roadside escalations and falsified obstruction charges. The implications settled heavily across the room. Judge Harper's gaze shifted slowly toward Officer Cole. Officer, were you aware the individual you detained held federal judicial oversight authority? Cole's voice came lower now. No, Your Honor. Had you verified his credentials before arrest? No. Had you contacted federal command after discovering federal materials? Cole swallowed. No. Judge Harper placed the credential wallet gently on the bench. The courtroom atmosphere had transformed completely. Adrian was no longer being examined as a defendant, but recognized as a federal authority embedded within the very system now under scrutiny. The suited observers in the gallery finally made sense. Task force presence, documentation witnesses, chain of evidence monitors. Judge Harper spoke with measured gravity. Let the record reflect that Mr. Adrian Cross holds verified federal judicial oversight status. She paused briefly before adding, and that this court now recognizes potential jurisdictional conflict regarding the original arrest. Officer Ryan Cole sat motionless in the witness stand, the realization settling in stages. The man he had mocked, restrained, and charged with obstruction had been federally assigned to investigate misconduct, including his own, and the courtroom proceedings were no longer about proving Adrian Cross's guilt. They were beginning to document Officer Cole's conduct instead. The courtroom atmosphere had changed so completely it no longer felt like the same proceeding. What began as a routine municipal arrest review had transformed into a federal oversight examination, and everyone in the room knew it. Judge Evelyn Harper adjusted the case file in front of her, reviewing new documentation that had just been handed up by the clerk. Her expression remained composed, but the gravity in her voice deepened when she spoke. Given the verified federal status of Mr. Adrian Cross, this court must now address jurisdictional authority over the original arrest. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Whitaker rose cautiously. Your Honor, the prosecution requests a brief recess to review federal disclosure materials. Before the judge could answer, Adrian spoke calm, respectful. No objection, Your Honor. However, for procedural clarity, I request the court first review Task Force Notice 7A, filed under Joint Federal Oversight Authority. He handed a sealed document to the bailiff, who delivered it to the bench. Judge Harper broke the seal, scanning the contents carefully. As she read, her posture straightened further. She looked up. Let the record reflect that Task Force Notice 7A designates Route 17 as an active federal observation corridor authorized for behavioral documentation of roadside enforcement conduct. A ripple moved through the gallery. Officer Ryan Cole shifted slightly in the witness chair. Judge Harper continued. This notice further confirms that Mr. Cross was embedded within this operation as a judicial compliance observer. Whitaker exhaled slowly, absorbing the implications. So the traffic stop itself was documented as part of a federal oversight initiative? Adrian answered, yes. Multiple departments were under evaluation for escalation thresholds, probable cause articulation, and procedural integrity. Judge Harper turned her attention fully to Officer Cole. Officer, I will ask you directly. Were you aware you were operating within a federally monitored corridor that evening? Cole shook his head. No, Your Honor. That is acceptable, she replied evenly. Monitoring operations are not typically disclosed to patrol units. She paused briefly before continuing. However, federal monitoring does not alter expected constitutional compliance standards. Cole didn't respond because there was nothing to argue. Judge Harper reviewed another page from the task force file. It further states that federal agents were positioned within response distance should operational interference occur. At those words, several heads in the gallery turned instinctively toward the suited observers seated in the second row. They remained still but attentive. Adrian spoke again. Your Honor, I would also request the court acknowledge that federal evidence chain custody supersedes municipal reporting when an embedded observer is detained. Judge Harper nodded. Granted. She looked toward the prosecution table. Mr. Whitaker, given these disclosures, the court must temporarily suspend the original obstruction charge pending federal review. Whitaker accepted the shift professionally. Understood, Your Honor. The judge's gaze returned to Officer Cole. Officer, your testimony remains under oath. However, from this point forward, it may be subject to federal administrative review in addition to judicial consideration. Cole's shoulders tightened. The meaning was clear. His statements were no longer just courtroom testimony. They were now federally reviewable conduct records. Judge Harper closed the task force file. Let the record reflect that jurisdictional priority has shifted pending federal determination. She paused, letting the institutional weight settle across the room, because the balance of authority had officially moved. Adrian Cross was no longer standing in a defendant's position. He was now operating within recognized federal capacity. And Officer Ryan Cole, still seated in the witness chair, was no longer testifying against a suspect. He was providing sworn statements. Inside an active federal oversight case that now included his own actions. The courtroom doors opened quietly, but the shift in attention was immediate. Every head turned instinctively as three individuals entered from the rear aisle, escorted by a federal court liaison. They were dressed in dark, formal suits. No uniforms, no visible insignia, yet their presence carried unmistakable authority. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Judge Evelyn Harper noticed them immediately. She paused mid-review of the federal task force file as the liaison approached the bench and handed up sealed identification documents. The judge reviewed them silently. Her expression remained controlled, but she gave a small, acknowledging nod before returning the credentials. "Let the record reflect," she said, voice steady, "that representatives from the Department of Justice Federal Oversight Task Force are now present in the courtroom." A low murmur moved through the gallery before fading. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Whitaker straightened his posture. At the witness stand, Officer Ryan Cole felt the shift without needing explanation. His earlier confidence had eroded chapter by chapter, but this moment accelerated the realization. This was no longer internal review. Federal command presence meant escalation beyond departmental discipline. Adrian Cross remained seated at the defense table, posture unchanged, hands calmly folded. He didn't turn around to acknowledge the arriving officials, because he already knew they were there. Judge Harper addressed the courtroom. Given the confirmed federal oversight operation and embedded observer status of Mr. Cross, the court will now allow federal representatives to submit procedural advisement if necessary. One of the suited officials stood briefly, not approaching the bench, but speaking from the gallery with formal restraint. "Your Honor, Federal Task Force protocol does not require immediate procedural intervention. We are present for observational continuity and evidentiary authentication." His tone was neutral, professional, not accusatory. But the implication was clear. They were documenting everything. Judge Harper nodded. "Understood." She turned her attention back to Officer Cole. "Officer, you remain under oath. I will ask you additional questions directly." Cole swallowed once before answering. "Yes, Your Honor. When you initiated the traffic stop, did you activate standard departmental escalation reporting?" "Yes." "Did you notify a supervising officer prior to physical extraction of the driver?" "No." "Why not?" "I believed the situation was under control." Judge Harper held his gaze. "Based on what threat indicators?" Cole hesitated. "Non-compliance. Delayed movement." Adrian remained still, but the federal observers were now taking notes. The judge continued. "Were Departmental D escalation protocols attempted prior to physical contact?" Cole's voice lowered. "No, Your Honor." The admission sat heavily in the room. Judge Harper shifted slightly. Her next question deliberate. "Officer, had you encountered federal personnel during prior patrol operations?" "Yes." "Were you trained on jurisdictional engagement procedures involving federal officials?" "Yes." "And those procedures require identity verification prior to escalation, correct?" A longer pause formed. "Yes." The courtroom grew quieter. Not dramatic silence. Institutionnel silence. The kind that forms when policy, training, and sworn conduct begin aligning on record. Judge Harper glanced briefly toward the federal observers before returning her focus to the stand. "Officer Cole, do you understand that this proceeding now intersects with federal administrative review?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you wish to amend or clarify any prior testimony before we proceed further?" Cole looked forward past the judge, past the prosecution table, his eyes landing briefly on Adrian Cross. For the first time, there was no arrogance left in his expression, only the realization of scale, because the man he had treated like a roadside obstruction was sitting calmly while federal command documented every word he spoke. Cole faced the bench again. "No amendments, Your Honor." Judge Harper nodded once. "Very well." But the weight in the room suggested something final had shifted. The federal task force hadn't intervened. They didn't need to. Their presence alone confirmed what this hearing had become. Not a defense proceeding, but a documented examination of authority, conduct, and command accountability, with Officer Ryan Cole now positioned at its center. Adrian Cross rose from his seat again, calm and deliberate, approaching the podium with measured steps. The courtroom seemed to tighten around him, each observer, lawyers, jurors, federal representatives leaning forward slightly, aware that every word about to be spoken could tilt the balance of authority. Officer Ryan Cole straightened in the witness chair, glancing briefly at the judge. He had maintained a confident posture until now, but the combination of federal oversight presence, body cam footage, and the verified credentials of the defendant had begun to chip away at it. For the first time, he appeared aware that he was no longer just testifying about a routine arrest. He was under scrutiny in a jurisdictional review that could end his career. Adrian's voice cut through the tense air, calm but precise. "Officer Cole," he began, "during the traffic stop you conducted on March 14th, you claimed that I refused commands and delayed compliance. Yet the body cam footage clearly shows that I kept my hands visible and verbally indicated intent to comply. How do you reconcile that?" Cole hesitated. He shifted slightly, the microphone picking up the subtle scrape of leather against metal from his utility belt. "I interpreted hesitation as non-compliance," he said slowly. Adrian nodded, acknowledging the answer without expression. "Interpretation," he repeated. "Not factual refusal, correct?" Cole's jaw tightened. "Yes, thank you. Now, regarding your observation of my vehicle, you discovered documents and devices related to federal investigations. Did you contact a federal supervisor immediately?" Cole blinked. "No. Why not?" "I didn't think it was necessary at the time." "Officer Cole," Adrian said, voice firm yet neutral. "Are you aware that withholding such notification violates internal departmental protocol when federal investigative materials are discovered?" Cole's hand twitched slightly, betraying his inner discomfort. "Yes, I understand now." Adrian allowed a brief pause for the statement to settle before continuing. "According to your own testimony, you stated, and I quote, 'I don't care who you think you are. You're getting out of this car.' Do you still stand by that statement?" Cole's lips tightened. "Yes. Do you acknowledge that at that moment you had no verified information regarding my federal authority or rank?" "Yes." Adrian's calm gaze swept the courtroom, making eye contact with the clerk, the judge, and the federal observers. Each person could sense the deliberate control of the moment, the way he let Cole's own admissions highlight procedural errors without raising his voice or losing composure. "Officer," he continued, "would you agree that your actions detaining a compliant individual, failing to verify identity, neglecting to notify federal command, constitute a procedural lapse according to patrol guidelines?" Cole's voice lowered. "Yes," the gallery murmured slightly. The judge's pen hovered above her notes, pausing mid-scribble. Even Whitaker at the prosecution table leaned back, a subtle frown crossing his features. This was no longer just a traffic arrest case. It was a meticulous exposure of procedural oversight and personal judgment errors. Adrian stepped back slightly, giving space to the courtroom. His cross-examination had not been aggressive. It had been surgical, precise, and damning in its clarity. "Thank you, Officer Cole. No further questions at this time." He returned to his seat, calm and composed, as if the entire courtroom, including federal observers and legal staff, had been silently observing a performance of authority done correctly by a defendant who was never truly a defendant. Officer Cole remained in the stand, visibly deflated, caught in the reality that his words, recorded and scrutinized, were now under federal review, and his actions had already shifted from routine arrest to an official inquiry against himself. A tense hush filled the courtroom. Even the ambient hum of the air conditioning seemed louder as Judge Evelyn Harper adjusted her glasses and leaned forward, scanning the record before her. The entire room, the gallery, the prosecution, the bailiff, even Officer Ryan Cole felt the shift. Something significant was about to happen. Adrian Cross stood once more, calm and deliberate, his movements precise. He approached the podium, slow, unhurried, every step measured as though he were conducting the pace of time itself. The gallery instinctively leaned in. Whispers died immediately, replaced by a charged anticipation. "Your Honor," Adrian began, voice steady and composed, I believe it is appropriate to clarify my professional status to ensure the accuracy of the record. Judge Harper gave a brief, almost imperceptible nod. Adrian reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulling out a sleek black wallet. With a fluid motion, he opened it to reveal a gold-embossed federal identification card. He placed it carefully on the podium, tilting it toward the judge and the court clerk. The holographic federal seal caught the morning sunlight streaming through the courtroom windows, flashing briefly like a beacon. The clerk, Marlene Ortiz, moved forward to verify the credentials. After a careful inspection, she handed them to Judge Harper, who held the card for a long, deliberate moment. The courtroom was silent, almost painfully so. The officers, attorneys, and spectators alike instinctively sensed that this small piece of identification carried enormous weight. Judge Harper spoke, her tone formal, precise, but heavy with significance. Let the record reflect that Mr. Adrian Michael Cross is a Senior Judicial Oversight Officer, Department of Justice, Federal Court Compliance Division. A faint murmur rippled through the gallery. Some observers exchanged glances. Others leaned forward, eyes wide. Even Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Whitaker's pen paused mid-note, his frown deepening. Officer Cole's confident posture faltered as the weight of the revelation struck him. Adrian remained composed, hands lightly folded behind his back. His gaze swept the courtroom slowly, landing momentarily on each individual. It was deliberate, not arrogance, but quiet authority. Judge Harper continued, her voice steady. Mr. Cross's duties include oversight of federal and municipal law enforcement agencies, conducting compliance audits, and reviewing procedural conduct to ensure adherence to legal standards. Mr. Cross was operating in his official capacity during the events in question. Cole's face went pale. The smirk he had worn earlier, the one that had carried him through confident testimony, was gone, replaced by a creeping realization that the courtroom had shifted entirely out of his control. Adrian spoke next, calm but with unmistakable authority. My role that evening involved monitoring roadway enforcement activity as part of an ongoing federal investigation. My documentation and observations were part of standard procedural oversight. The words sank into the courtroom like heavy stones. Every observer, from the gallery to the federal agents in the back, recognized the implications. This was no ordinary arrest. This was a direct collision between municipal overreach and federal authority. Officer Cole's hands gripped the edges of the witness stand. His earlier bravado had evaporated. For the first time, he understood the full scope of the man he had mocked, restrained, and falsely accused. Adrian Cross outranked everyone in that room, not just him, but even the judge's procedural reach in certain oversight matters. Judge Harper leaned back slightly, her expression composed but sharp. The record will reflect the verified federal authority of Mr. Cross and the potential jurisdictional conflict arising from the events of March 14th. The courtroom held its collective breath. The reveal was complete. The man who had seemed like a routine defendant was, in fact, a federal authority embedded in the very system monitoring misconduct. And now, the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Officer Cole was no longer just testifying against a suspect, he was the subject of scrutiny himself. The courtroom's atmosphere had shifted completely. The initial confidence that Officer Ryan Cole had carried onto the stand was gone, replaced by a tangible tension that seemed to vibrate through the polished wood and marble of the chamber. Every observer sensed the balance of authority had reversed. What had started as a routine traffic stop had become a procedural reckoning. Adrian Cross sat back at the defense table, composed and deliberate. He didn't need to raise his voice. His credentials had already spoken volumes. Now, it was time for a meticulous unraveling of the narrative Cole had presented to the court. He picked up his notes, precise, minimal, and approached the podium once more. "Officer Cole," Adrian began evenly, "you've testified regarding my actions during the roadside stop. I would like to revisit several points for clarity. starting with the timeline of your decisions. Cole shifted in the witness chair. His eyes darted briefly toward Judge Harper before returning to Adrian. There was a faint tremor in his jaw, a subtle sign of stress he could not conceal. You indicated that you decided to escalate physical intervention at 9:44 p.m., Adrian continued. Yet the body cam footage shows I fully complied with all verbal instructions before that timestamp. How do you reconcile your timeline with the visual evidence? Cole exhaled slowly. I interpreted certain delays in movement as non-compliance. Interpretation, Adrian repeated, deliberate, not factual refusal. Correct? Yes, Cole admitted, his voice quieter now. Adrian's gaze swept the courtroom, making eye contact with Judge Harper, the prosecution, and the federal observers seated in the back. The courtroom felt almost suspended in the weight of the moment. Officer, you also discovered documents and devices in my vehicle, Adrian continued, yet you did not contact federal command before physically detaining me. Can you explain why standard protocol wasn't followed? Cole's hands clenched slightly. I did not realize at the time that verification was required. Adrian nodded. So your actions physically removing a compliant individual, failing to notify federal authorities, occurred without confirmation of identity or rank? Yes. A murmur swept through the gallery. Judge Harper raised a hand, restoring silence. Even Whitaker shifted uneasily, aware that the procedural exposure was now mounting. Adrian paused, letting Cole's admissions resonate through the courtroom. Then he pressed further. Officer Cole, according to your testimony, you stated, I don't care who you think you are. You're getting out of this car. Was that before verifying my federal credentials? Yes, Cole said, voice low. So, in essence, your decisions were made without full knowledge, contrary to both departmental and federal oversight protocols? Adrian asked. Cole's jaw tightened, and he nodded reluctantly. Yes. Adrian's tone softened slightly, though it remained precise. Officer, it is now clear that the escalation of force, the failure to follow protocol, and the disregard for verification placed you under review not just internally, but federally. The gallery absorbed the statement. The federal observers leaned slightly forward, recording meticulously. Whitaker closed his notebook briefly, acknowledging the growing weight of the evidence. Judge Harper broke the silence. Officer Cole, your testimony, combined with the verified oversight credentials of Mr. Cross and the body cam evidence, will now be considered as part of a federal administrative review. Do you understand the implications? Cole nodded, silent, shoulders slumped. The realization had fully set in. The courtroom no longer revolved around Adrian Cross as a defendant. It revolved around Cole, his decisions, and the consequences of misapplied authority. Adrian returned to his seat, posture impeccable, letting the weight of accountability settle firmly on the witness stand. Every word, every hesitation, every action had been documented. And now, the crossfire of authority and accountability was fully engaged. The courtroom had grown tense, almost suffocating, as Judge Evelyn Harper surveyed the proceedings. Officer Ryan Cole sat in the witness chair, his earlier arrogance replaced by an unmistakable anxiety. Every movement he made, the tightening of his hands around the edges of the stand, the slight tremor in his shoulders betrayed his awareness that the courtroom was no longer a place of comfort, but a chamber of accountability. Judge Harper spoke slowly, her voice deliberate and measured. Officer Cole, it is now evident that the original arrest you conducted did not account for the verified federal authority of Mr. Adrian Cross, nor did it adhere to established protocols for escalation, verification, and interagency notification. Cole swallowed, voice barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. The gallery held its collective breath. The two federal observers in the back of the room took note silently, their presence reinforcing the gravity of the moment. Whitaker, the assistant U.S. attorney, shifted uneasily in his seat. For the first time, even the prosecution understood the implications. This was no longer a simple traffic stop case. This was a federal oversight matter, and Cole's actions had directly triggered it. Judge Harper adjusted the microphone. "Officer, please explain why, after discovering federal materials in Mr. Cross's vehicle, you did not contact a supervisor or the Federal Command Center. Your testimony must be clear." Cole hesitated, then exhaled. I acted based on the situation as I perceived it. I believed I was following standard patrol procedure. Judge Harper's gaze sharpened. "Perception does not absolve responsibility. Your actions detaining a compliant federal officer, escalating force without verification, represent procedural violations. Do you understand that these violations will be formally documented and forwarded for federal administrative review?" "Yes, Your Honor," Cole admitted, his voice lower now, almost defeated. Adrian Cross remained seated at the defense table, calm and collected, his hands lightly folded. He didn't need to speak. The courtroom already recognized his authority. His prior questions and the federal documentation had done all the work. The narrative had shifted irrevocably. Cole, the once confident officer, was now at the center of scrutiny. Judge Harper continued, her tone firm but fair. "Furthermore, the court recognizes that Mr. Cross was operating in an official federal oversight capacity during this traffic stop. As such, your conduct, Officer Cole, will be reviewed for compliance with both departmental and federal standards." The officer's shoulders slumped further. There was no denying it. His career, reputation, and authority were now under formal examination. Every word he had spoken, every decision he had made on that night, and every misstep during the arrest had been recorded, documented, and validated against federal protocol. Whitaker rose carefully, addressing the court. "Your Honor, given these circumstances, the prosecution defers to the court and federal oversight for determination regarding Officer Cole's procedural compliance." Judge Harper nodded and turned toward Cole one final time. "Officer, this court formally acknowledges that the balance of authority has shifted. Mr. Cross's verified federal status places him in oversight of the events in question, and your actions will now be evaluated accordingly. You are formally instructed to cooperate fully with the review." Cole nodded silently, the weight of accountability pressing down on him. For the first time, he understood the magnitude of his errors not just for the arrest, but for the procedural integrity of the entire law enforcement operation that had been under scrutiny. Adrian Cross remained composed, almost serene, as the courtroom absorbed the reality. Authority had been exercised correctly, and accountability had been enforced. Officer Cole's position, once dominant, was now clearly undermined, leaving him exposed to the consequences of his decisions. The courtroom had transformed. The focus had shifted from the supposed defendant to the officer himself, and in that silence, the true power of federal oversight and procedural justice resonated unmistakably. The courtroom felt heavier now, the weight of the preceding hours settling like a fog over polished wood and marble. Officer Ryan Cole sat in the witness chair, shoulders slumped, eyes focused downward. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by the stark realization that every decision he had made during that traffic stop had consequences both immediate and permanent. Judge Evelyn Harper adjusted her glasses, reviewing the extensive documentation that had been submitted throughout the morning. Federal oversight records, body cam footage, and Adrian Cross's verified credentials lay before her. Every piece told the same story. Officer Cole's escalation of force, failure to verify identity, and neglect in contacting federal authorities constituted a procedural breakdown that could no longer be overlooked. "Officer Cole," Judge Harper began, her voice measured, The court acknowledges the verified federal authority of Mr. Adrian Cross and recognizes that your actions, as testified, did not comply with departmental protocols or federal oversight standards. This court, in coordination with federal authorities, will forward your conduct for formal administrative review. Cole's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the edges of the stand. The finality of her words pressed heavily against him. There was no defense left, no smirk, no confident retort. The full scope of accountability had been laid bare. Adrian Cross remained seated, composed and unflinching, his posture perfectly still. Every step he had taken in this courtroom had been precise, deliberate, and professional. He had allowed the evidence, the footage, and the documentation to speak for him. Now, the courtroom recognized him not as a defendant, but as a federal authority whose actions had been lawful, justified, and properly executed. Judge Harper continued, turning slightly to address the gallery and the federal observers. Let the record reflect that Mr. Cross acted entirely within his federal mandate. His intervention and documentation have preserved the integrity of this courtroom and highlighted necessary procedural oversight. The Department of Justice and relevant federal authorities will review the circumstances surrounding Officer Cole's actions in detail. The gallery, once quiet, now absorbed the weight of the statement. Observers leaned forward, understanding that they had witnessed more than a routine arrest. They had witnessed the intersection of municipal authority and federal oversight and the consequences of misapplied power. Adrian spoke, voice calm and precise, addressing the courtroom. Your Honor, my intention has always been procedural integrity. Every step of my observation and testimony today reflects the standards expected of federal oversight officers. My role is not to punish, but to ensure accountability and adherence to lawful protocol. Judge Harper nodded, acknowledging the clarity and professionalism of his statement. The record will reflect the court's recognition of Mr. Cross's federal authority and the necessity for administrative review of Officer Cole's actions. Court is adjourned until further notice regarding the review process. As the gavel struck, a palpable tension lifted slightly from the room. Officers, attorneys, and observers began to rise, but the lesson lingered. Authority is not measured by confidence alone. It is reinforced by knowledge, verification, and adherence to protocol. Adrian collected his documents calmly, returned his credentials to his jacket pocket, and walked toward the exit with the same quiet dignity that had defined his entire presence in the courtroom. Officer Cole remained seated for a moment longer, silent, processing the inevitable repercussions. Outside the courtroom, the sunlight reflected off polished surfaces, signaling the start of a new day, one in which procedural accountability had triumphed over unchecked authority, and one where Adrian Cross's quiet strength had ensured justice was upheld. The courtroom, now emptying, carried the lingering truth. Power without verification can fail, but integrity, preparation, and lawful authority endure.